There's a reason your grandfather's old sedan still fires up after a winter of silence, while your newer daily coughs up a dashboard full of warnings over a loose gas cap. Some machines were built like tools, not toys. They survive broken roads, bad fuel, and owners who treat oil changes as optional. The secret isn't magic. It's margins, design choices that favor longevity over showroom flash. Today we're opening that hood and walking through the dozen decisions that made certain cars feel immortal. We'll visit the legends, decode why they last, and then face the uncomfortable question, could anything built today join them? Stick around, because the answer isn't as simple as they don't make them like they used to. In some corners they still do if you know where to look, but that's getting ahead of the story. First, define the rules of immortality, because forever isn't a slogan, it's a blueprint. The longest-lived cars weren't fast first. They were calm first. Their engines loafed where others labored. Engineers chose thick bearings, conservative compression, and fueling that never chased the last horsepower. Cooling systems were oversized for the worst day in August. Transmissions were geared for smooth heat, not headline specs. Every part that could fail quietly was made boring on purpose. Simple, predictable, repairable. When a sensor could do the job, a cable did. When plastic would suffice, steel stayed. If a component was buried, the blueprint moved it within reach. And because parts availability is half of longevity, these platforms ran for years with minimal changes. That created an ecosystem, warehouses with shelves that still matter, junkyards that double as pharmacies, forums that function like medical schools. It's not romance, it's infrastructure. A car lasts forever when its weakest link is either very strong or very easy to replace. If that's the recipe, why did manufacturers ever spend extra to build this way? For a stretch of decades, durability wasn't a quirky niche. It was the brand. Taxi fleets were rolling billboards, and failure on a crowded boulevard did more damage than a bad review. Warranty budgets were blunt instruments, overbilled once or paid thousands of times. Prestige mattered too. The halo didn't come from a startup screen animation, it came from a door that closed like a vault 10 years later. And outside wealthy markets, survival was a sales strategy. Roads were rough, fuel was dirty, mechanics were gifted but often under-equipped. Win there, and your reputation went everywhere. So, a handful of companies leaned in. They accepted extra steel, extra testing, extra cost. They weren't chasing a quarter, they were buying a decade of trust. That trust still pays dividends in auctions, exports, and word of mouth. But incentives change. When they did, immortality got expensive. Before we argue about the end of an era, meet the cars that defined it. Immortal cars share a tactile honesty. Steel that doesn't ping. Fasteners that don't round, housings that don't crack when a wrench slips, galvanization where it counts, seam sealer that actually seals, engines with thick cylinder walls and generous oil capacity, naturally aspirated layouts that trade peak thrills for long flat reliability, mechanical fuel injection or early electronic systems kept intentionally simple, often with redundancy. Body on frame when abuse was unavoidable, rigid unibody when weight and packaging demanded it, but braced, boxed, and thought through. Serviceability was elevated from afterthought to design goal. Drain plugs you can reach, belts you can change without bleeding, filters that aren't hidden under an intake maze. This wasn't nostalgia, it was logistics as a philosophy. If the worst day is survivable, the average year becomes painless. That's longevity you can feel with a socket set. Now let's name names, starting with the sedan that taxis turned into folklore. The W123 didn't earn its reputation from a brochure. It earned it idling in 45 degrees Celsius heat with the AC on and the trunk full, then doing it again tomorrow. The legendary diesel, simple, slow, and stubborn, ran like farm equipment in a suit. Vacuum systems looked fussy on paper, but were robust in practice, and when they did misbehave, fixes were straightforward. Doors felt overbuilt because they were hardware resisted the rust of real life. More important, parts stayed common and affordable across years and markets. You didn't scrap a W123, you refreshed it. Owners talk about cars that feel better at 200,000 miles than they did at 80,000, as if the metal needed time to settle into itself. There's lore about accountants hating the margins. Believe the spirit, if not every detail. The car was engineered to a standard, not a price point, and it shows. Decades later, every time a worn key still turns with dignity. If the W123 was solidity in a suit, Sweden brought the lab coat. The Volvo 240 looks like a refrigerator on wheels until you drive one that's been maintained. Then the logic clicks. Seats that respect your spine, sightlines that respect your brain, structure that respects physics. Engines like the B21 and B23 aren't exotic, they're durable by design, forgiving when owners aren't, timing, fueling, cooling. Each lives in a wide comfort zone, so nothing lives on a knife edge. The car rewards basic care with improbable mileage. It rewards neglect with time to learn better habits. And when something finally needs attention, access is rational, documentation is plentiful, and communities are encyclopedias. The 240 proved a valuable point. You don't have to choose between safety and serviceability. You can have both and keep both for a very long time. Of course, some legends didn't wear a lab coat. They wore mud. The Hilux doesn't read spec sheets. It reads terrain. Those old 4-cylinder 22Rs, 22RA engines didn't chase thrill numbers. They chased tomorrow. Timing chains, conservative heat, and fueling that didn't demand perfect sensors made them predictable. Frames were simple and stout. Leaf springs weren't luxurious. They were loyal. Drivelines were honest. It hauled gravel, crossed rivers, carried families, and kept starting after indignities that would retire lesser trucks. People tried to kill the myth on camera and failed in spectacular fashion. The point wasn't invincibility. It was recoverability. You could drown it, dry it, and keep going with hand tools, patience, and maybe a prayer. In places where supply chains are rumors and mechanics are magicians, that matters. Reliability isn't never breaking. Reliability is always coming back. If Hilux is the field-tested scalpel, its big cousin is the sledgehammer with a passport. The 60 Series Land Cruiser was designed for the kind of trip where a failure means walking. Straight 6 engines with agricultural manners. Carburetors or simple injection that tolerate bad fuel. Manual hubs, manual windows, manual everything. Because a crank never throws a software error. Axles sized for abuse. Transfer cases you could trust miles from help. The truck isn't quick and it doesn't pretend. It just endures. That's why the 60 built the Myth Aid Convoys, survey teams, families on broken tracks. When these trucks age, they don't feel fragile. They feel settled. Rust fights back, of course. All steel eventually meets oxygen. But with honest metal and a parts network that never fully sleeps, a healthy 60 still looks like a plan. That's what forever really is. The feeling that your machine is on your side. America had its own answer to longevity, bigger, boxier, and built for work. Before SUVs learned latte art, the Suburban did jobs. The square body era put a truck's backbone under a family shell and let torque do the talking. Small block 350S and big block 454S weren't stressed. They were bored. Cooling was generous. The four-wheel drive hardware was mechanical and understandable. Automatics were simple. Manuals were stubborn. Interiors weren't fragile. They were hosable. What kept these alive wasn't nostalgia, it was economics. On a ranch, in an oil field, on a job site, downtime is the enemy. A platform you can fix in an afternoon wins. Every Suburban that still wears its original paint under a layer of dust is a reminder when a vehicle is designed to be a tool, it ages like one, scuffed, dependable, and strangely handsome. But the most surprising immortal might be the sedan that dressed like a cop, because it usually was one. Imagine a car expected to idle for hours, leap to wide open throttle, hop curbs, climb medians, and do it with a trunk full of gear every day. The Crown Vic was a truck in a tux, body on frame for abuse, a 4.6-liter V8 tuned for boredom rather than drama. An electrical system built to feed radios, lights, and whatever else you bolted on. Departments loved them because parts were cheap and mechanics already knew the drill. Retired cruisers became taxis. Retired taxis became budget commuter heroes. These cars lived 3 lives and asked for nothing more than fluids and basic respect. The platform had controversies and recalls like any widely used machine, but its reputation wasn't built in a lab. It was built on streets at 3 in the morning. That kind of resume is hard to fake. If the Crown Vic is a blunt instrument, the next one is a clever crowbar that never slipped. The XJ looked delicate because it was compact. It wasn't unibody, yes, but reinforced where it counted. The 4.0-liter inline-6 was a study in patience, smooth, long-stroked, and content at low stress. Drivetrains were straightforward. Lift it a little or leave it stock. Either way, it did the job. Rural mail carriers used right-hand drive versions on routes that ruined cars. Off-roaders adopted them because they survived mistakes. Owners formed a culture that keeps knowledge and parts flowing. It's not perfect. Rust sneaks in. Crash standards have advanced. But as a package, weight, simplicity, reachability, the XJ hits that rare sweet spot, old enough to be fixable, new enough to be useful. Drive one that's been cared for, and you'll understand that some legends didn't just run forever, they dragged a mountain while doing it. The first gen Cummins Ram happened when someone asked, What if we put a medium-duty heart into a pickup? The answer was torque that didn't apologize and durability that bordered on absurd, mechanical injection, conservative boost, cast iron everything. It sounded like a grain silo in a thunderstorm and would outlast several body shells. In fact, that's what happened. Engines outlived trucks and were swapped into newer frames like transplant candidates. Automatics were the weak link until built up manuals were unbothered. Fuel economy improved as miles piled on because tolerances settled. These trucks were not refined, they were honest, and honesty ages well. If you want to understand engineered margins, listen to one idol. It's not trying, it's waiting. With the legends on the table, we have to ask the uncomfortable question: why did immortality fade? First, complexity crept in. Safety and emissions made cars better for people and kinder to air, but every layer of smarts added surfaces for failure. A window switch used to be a wire and a button, now it can be a network node that talks to a gateway, that talks to a module, that talks to a diagnostic device. When one link hiccups, you chase ghosts. Second, incentives shifted. Finance cycles rewarded frequent turnover. Weight targets and cost targets collided with old-school margins. Thin materials saved pennies at scale. Third, software arrived everywhere. When it's great, it's invisible. When it's bad, it's all you notice. Features live behind paywalls. Performance lives behind subscriptions, and repairability lives behind legal fights. That doesn't mean modern cars are doomed. It means the path to forever is different. You don't just need metal that lasts. You need code that stays supported and rights that let you fix what you own. If the battlefield changed, maybe the heroes did too. So where do you find forever now? There's a quiet sweet spot hiding in plain sight, late 2000s to early 2010s cars with naturally aspirated port-injected engines and simple automatics or well-known manuals. Enough safety to feel modern, enough simplicity to stay sane. Fewer turbos, fewer sensors in unreachable places. If you go hybrid, pick nameplates with long battery supply chains and proven replacement paths. If you go EV, understand that survivability depends on pack cost, parts access, and software support windows, because the motor might last, but an unsupported control module ends the story. Whatever you buy, use the 4 rules. 1. Rust beats mileage. A perfect engine on a rotted frame is a parts donor. 2. Parts map first. Filters, pumps, bushings, are they in stock and cheap? 3. Electrical sanity check. Look for hacked alarms, corroded grounds, butchered stereos. 4. Community. If a platform has forums, videos, and spreadsheets, you won't be alone when something weird happens. That's modern immortality. You, a network, and a car that isn't fighting you. Along the way, clear up the myths, because accuracy is part of respect. Pop-up headlights didn't vanish because of a singular ban. They lost a quiet war to pedestrian safety, aero drag, and better fixed lighting tech. That they lost money on every old luxury sedan line is charming, not confirmed. What's real is the philosophy. You can feel it in hinges and harnesses. And one more hard truth: many immortals you love weren't crash tested to modern standards. Respect them for what they are, not what time has turned them into. If you daily a legend, add modern brakes where you can, thoughtful tires where you can't, and a realistic plan for parts. That's not heresy, that's stewardship. Forever is a partnership between the choices engineers made and the choices you make now. With the myths filed away, the only thing left is the reason this topic hooks people year after year. The cars we call immortal were not miracles. They were decisions. Engineers chose under stress over bragging rights, serviceability over spectacle, and margins over marketing. Those choices turned machines into companions. They hauled kids to school, medicine to villages, and memories across borders. They taught generations to wrench, to listen, to fix. Today, the world is noisier. Software updates land overnight. Subscriptions try to rent you what's already in your driveway. But the old lesson still stands. Longevity is built, not wished. You can find it in careful designs, in honest parts, in platforms the world has already proved. You can also build it yourself with maintenance, knowledge, and a community that shares both. So here's the question to take with you. If forever once came from extra metal and calm engines, what would it take to create forever in a software-defined car? If the answer is rights, support, and access, then durability hasn't died. It's just waiting for the next engineer and the next owner willing to choose it. And that, more than any ad, is why some cars were built to last forever.